if I were to take the MCAT again, or someone were to ask me advice on how they should prepare for the MCAT, this is my response to that. So the 4 things I want to talk about are the timeline of taking the MCAT, materials, preparing for the content, and then principles or like guiding mindsets for taking the test. So first is the timeline. When do you want to take your test? So the test is good for 3 years, and most people take them in June, and that was the advice that I received, but that's not what I did, and I don't recommend taking it in June. So I wanted to go from graduating from university and then the next semester, like the fall semester. If you graduated in the spring, going in the fall into medical school in the fall. To do that, then you need to apply a year early. So I wanted to be starting in the class of 2022. I needed to apply in 2021, and that application opens in May. So I need to take my MCAT. So if you're taking your MCAT in June of 2021 to go into medical school in 2022, you're kind of late at that point, or at least that's what it seemed like. So I actually took my MCAT in January of 2020. So I took it in January before I applied to medical school. The application opened in 2021, through senior year, and to go into medical school in 2022. So then that backs up the timeline. So that's what the timeline piece is about. And it'll come into materials as well. When I bought materials, what I didn't know is that the materials, you have access to them through AAMC for a year. Because the materials are only good for a year, then buying the materials 1 year before your test date, so you get the most amount of time from the materials. If I was going to test, and I knew I was going to test and take the MCAT in January of 2021, then buy your materials in January of 2020. That gives you a full year of access, the longest time of access to those materials that you purchased. So that's the first thing I would have known. I didn't do that. I purchased them in September, and then I tested in January, and then I was done. And so then that rest time, February through September, they weren't even used by anybody. So they could have been better utilized, and I could have had more time to go through more stuff. So that's my first recommendation, is learning the timeline, understanding the timeline. And if you buy access to something and it's like a year subscription, then you need to start studying a year before you want to take the MCAT. And that needs to play into the timeline of when do you want to apply to medical school. Okay, so that's number 1, is the timeline. So I'd recommend purchasing materials 1 year before, and also recommend taking the test in January. This is why I recommend taking the test in January. Because I wanted to go to medical school in 2022, in the fall, starting in July of 2022, I would need to apply when the application would open in May of 2021. And you don't want to be preparing the application and studying for the MCAT at the same time. It's a lot of work. Versus what I did is I had taken the test in January. It'll still apply. It still counts. The test is good for 3 years. And then I knew my MCAT score applying to medical school before students who had I'm still studying and preparing my application. And then the focus of that semester was to complete the application and continue working at school. And that seemed a lot better. It was a lot less stressful than the other students and what I observed them doing. Okay, so that's the timeline. A year before, when are you applying to medical school? Taking it the January before the application. Those would be my recommendations, and that's why I would recommend those things. Next, materials to study. This isn't for MCAT content, or I may do something like that, but this is more where to get to content. And this kind of comes from how I think about when I took the ACT, was you want to study with materials that are written by the test writers. AAMC materials were the only materials I used. I didn't use Princeton. I didn't use Kaplan or Altius. I think they're helpful, but the primary materials that are most important are the materials from the test writers themselves. So that's the first thing. The bundle I got was like $268. And like I said, I had access to it for a year, got all the digital materials. I was very happy with it. I didn't even make it through all of them. And so that's one of my regrets, is I didn't make it through all the materials before I tested. And I think that hurt me a little bit. Reddit was also really helpful for me. I'll try to post links to where I found some other study materials that were really helpful to me. And then guiding principles for studying. One of the most helpful ones was never miss the same question twice. So if you miss a question, understand why you missed that question, and learn what you need to learn to never miss that question again. That's a really helpful mindset and made studying really efficient. The next one is practice how you play, and that fits into a lot more things than taking this test. When you take a practice test, taking them in the same conditions that you when you take a practice test, taking them in the same conditions that you would take the normal tests, try to stick to the timing. Try to stick when you can eat and drink. Those things are helpful. Practice how you like your play. You do get access to paper, and read the materials on that. This was something that surprised me, and it didn't make sense until after I started doing it. But when you're reviewing, you should review every exam, every practice exam you take. This is where most of the learning happens. And if you're okay or really good, you'll review all the questions that you got wrong and understand why you got wrong, right? Your reasoning for why did I get this wrong? Where was my thinking wrong? And then writing out what is the right way to think to get this question right. And doing that for every question that you get wrong. Ideally, a great student will do that for all questions. So you don't miss questions that you got right, but you got it right for the wrong reasons. You got to be patient with it, because when you do that process, if it took you 6 hours to take the test, it will take you longer to do the review process. So the review process is literally longer than the test when you're reviewing any practice exam that you take. That's something to be aware of. Okay, that's a lot that I have for the MCAT. Hopefully that's helpful. These are a lot of things that I've just thought about after taking the test, and they may or may not be around. Final words is that you can do it. This is not a test that is impossible. I happen to quite like the exam. I felt it was very useful because the things I'd been learning in class actually applied to being able to do this thing successfully. But you can do it. Don't give up. Keep working at it. You're totally capable. Just keep focusing on getting questions right, knowing what you need to know to be able to do that. And be patient. That'll be really key. Good. All right. That's the MCAT. I'll come with more later.